Every sentient species in the galaxy fears the dark. It's instinct, hardwired, universal, older than language, except one. Humans walk into dark rooms without a second thought. They sleep in the dark on purpose. They tell their children the dark is nothing to be afraid of. The coalition psychology team set out to understand why humans lost this fear. They dug into human evolution deeper and deeper, looking for the moment the fear disappeared. And what they found at the bottom wasn't that humans stopped fearing the dark. It's that, a very long time ago, the humans learned that they were the thing in it. This is the story of what they found. Coalition scientists investigated why humans lack instinctual fear of darkness. They discovered that long ago, humans didn't lose their fear. They became the thing that the dark should fear. The final report was so disturbing that it was classified, and every scientist involved now sleeps with a light on. The inquiry began quietly, buried in a coalition budgetary line item, a modest grant to the Interspecies Psychological Institute. The premise seemed unremarkable. Catalog the instinctual fear responses of all known sentient species across the galaxy. Darkness aversion was just one metric among dozens. The research team gathered data from over 300 member species. Across every civilization, irrespective of biology or world of origin, the pattern held firm. Diurnal or nocturnal, predator or prey, every creature that evolved intelligence carried a baseline shudder when placed in unlit environments. Every creature, that is, except one. Humanity refused to follow the pattern. The data was so aberrant that the lead researcher, Dr. Valen Tor, initially assumed a measurement error. He retested 27 human subjects, all of them baseline civilians, none with combat training. They sat in pitch-black rooms for hours, monitored for cortisol spikes, pupil dilation, any sign of a fight-or-flight cascade. Nothing. One subject even fell asleep. Tor wrote in his notes, "It is as if the dark is not a void to them but a blanket." The next logical step was to ask why. The Institute assembled an interdisciplinary team, evolutionary biologists, neuroarchaeologists, human historians, and a handful of xenotherapists for the psychological deep dives. They began with the hypothesis that humans had simply adapted to darkness so thoroughly that instinct melted away. Perhaps their world's ancient predators had forced them into night hunting, and over millennia, fear was extinguished. That theory held until the first fossil site excavation on the human homeworld in a region called Olduvai. They found cut marks on bones, but those marks were not defensive. They were on predators, large felids and ursids, animals with no natural enemies. The fossil record showed a sudden, catastrophic reversal in the predator hierarchy, roughly 2 million human years ago. Something happened in human evolution, a genetic switch thrown, and the prey became the hunter. Not a scavenger, not an ambush specialist that relied on daylight, but an active, methodical night predator. The Institute's computer models, when calibrated with this new data, revealed a terrifying efficiency. The human persistence hunt was already well documented, the ability to jog after prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. But the night hunt was something else. The dark became a weapon. Other creatures stumbled, relied on moonlight, moved slowly. Humans, using their acute hearing, their uncanny ability to pattern-match subtle sounds in silence, could navigate almost normally. They learned to see with their ears, to stalk blind. Dr. Tor ordered a new series of psychoacoustic tests. Subjects were placed in soundproofed black rooms and played faint recordings of breathing, heartbeats, footsteps. Their neural responses were instantaneous, mapped to the same brain regions active in a predator tracking its quarry. The human brain, it turned out, was wired for hunting in the dark. The fear never disappeared because it was never there. It had been replaced by a predatory instinct so complete that darkness was not a threat to be avoided, but a tool to be deployed. The horror of the revelation, the thing that Dr. Tor could not unsee, was that this instinct did not reside in some forgotten prehistoric ancestor. It was alive, active, and cataloged in every living human. The report that crossed his desk suggested a simple, world-shattering conclusion. Put any human in complete darkness, remove social consequence, and the ancient programming awakens. The others, the 300 species that shivered in the dark, did so because somewhere deep in their genetic memory, their ancestors knew that night belonged to something else. Something that walked on two legs and smiled in the shadows. Tor refused to publish. He sealed the data under the highest classification order the coalition recognizes. But before he did, he recorded one final entry in his private log. He described a sound he'd begun to hear at night in his own quarters when the lights were off. A soft, steady breathing just at the edge of his perception coming from the corner where no one should be. The breathing started again the following night. Dr. Tor had installed 6 additional light panels in his quarters, flooding every centimeter with cold white luminescence. He sat rigid in his chair, eyes fixed on the corner where the sound originated. The lights flickered once, then held. The breathing did not stop. It was a steady, low rhythm like a creature resting after a long hunt waiting. He called out, voice trembling, but received no answer. Only the breathing answered, a slow exhalation that made the hairs on his arms rise beneath his scales. He could not sleep. He did not sleep for 3 days after that. By the 4th, his assistant found him in the lab, wide-eyed and muttering about shadows that moved when you stopped looking. Dr. Selin Kaur was the first to notice that Tor's paranoia was not isolated. She was a xenotherapist, assigned to monitor the psychological well-being of the research team. When she reviewed the security logs from Tor's quarters, she expected to find evidence of a break-in, perhaps a ventilation malfunction causing auditory hallucinations. Instead, she found a pattern. The breathing was not random. It synchronized with Tor's own respiration. When his heart rate spiked, the breathing grew slower, calmer, as if it was matching him, mirroring him. She ran the audio through a neural pattern recognition algorithm. The result came back with a 97% match for human sleep breathing, specifically the breathing of a human in a state of deep, unconscious predatory awareness. The computer suggested the file be sent to the Coalition's Xenoforensics unit. She did not send it. She started listening to the dark corners of her own office. Within a week, 3 more staffers reported auditory disturbances. All of them had accessed the sealed data even briefly. The psychological contamination was spreading. Director Thanel, the head of the institute, called an emergency closed session. Tor was absent. His quarters were found empty that morning, the door ajar, a single word scratched into the metal desk. Athonai. It was an ancient human word, no one recognized but later translated from human linguistic archives, a goddess of wisdom and of warfare. The director declared a Level 7 information quarantine. All digital copies of the report were to be purged, all physical notes incinerated. The team was ordered into isolation. They thought they could contain it, but the data had already been backed up to an off-site server. A junior researcher, terrified of what she had seen, had sent an encrypted fragment to a contact in the Coalition Ethics Committee. The fragment was titled, in a moment of despair, "The dark was never empty." It contained the seminal finding that human brains, when deprived of light, emit a low-frequency neural resonance that triggers a panic response in all known non-human sentient biology. It was a hunt signal, a predator's ping, evolved to freeze prey. And every other species that had ever walked under stars carried the receptor for it because, the report hypothesized, they had all been prey to something that looked very much like a human, a very long time ago, before any of them had crawled from their primordial soups. The implication was a galaxy-wide ancestral memory of being hunted by bipedal, intelligent predators who owned the dark. The ethics committee did not believe it. They demanded the raw data. The data was incontrovertible. Neural scans from 17 species, exposed to a human in a dark room at a distance, showed identical amygdala cascades consistent with terror-induced paralysis. The humans, unaware of their effect, simply thought the aliens were shy. The committee chair, a being of luminescent chitin and tender empathy, issued a single statement before resigning. "We have brought the beast into our home, and it does not know it is a beast." The leak was unstoppable. Within hours, every delegate in the coalition had seen the fragment. The galactic news feeds ran a single headline across 1,000 worlds: "Humanity's shadow, the hidden predator in our midst." Panic ignited. Spaceports closed their terminals to human travelers. Entire residential sectors demanded that humans be removed from their buildings after local astronomical nightfall. Lighting corporations saw their stocks surge 10,000%. The Coalition Council convened an emergency session, the first unscheduled session in 400 standard years. They debated whether to quarantine the human homeworld, to restrict all human movement after dark, to demand some impossible modification of their neural architecture. The humans, for their part, were bewildered. Their ambassadors insisted they had no idea, that they felt no malice, that the dark had always been a comfort to them. That confession only made it worse. The other species asked, "How can you be comfortable with something that freezes the blood of every other thinking creature?" The human answer, always the same, always delivered with genuine confusion: "Because it's quiet, because we can finally hear." Meanwhile, Tor was not dead. He had fled to a remote outpost on the edge of Coalition space, a station that orbited a dead star where light was scarce. He was searching for something in the deep archives of a long-vanished species, a people who had existed only as faint orbital debris and a scattering of linguistic crystals. He believed they had encountered the proto-humans, the original hunters. The crystals, when he found one partially intact, told a story in a language of pure mathematics. The translation, when he fed it through his portable device, read: "The walkers came when the sun slept. They did not need light. They did not fear the void. They were the void with teeth. We learned to fear the dark because we learned that the dark had eyes." And then, in a final sequence of glyphs that took his device minutes to decrypt, a set of coordinates. They pointed to a region of the galaxy that the Coalition had never mapped, a dark rift where stars were strangely absent. Tor programmed his shuttle to take him there. He had to know if they were still there, waiting. And as his shuttle accelerated into the black, the breathing he had heard in his quarters resumed. Only now it came from the seat behind him. Tor did not turn around. He sat frozen in the pilot's seat, the cold hum of the shuttle's drive filling the silence between breaths. The breathing behind him was slow, patient, the respiration of a creature that had been waiting for a very long time. He forced himself to speak, his voice cracking as he asked the question that had been clawing at his mind since the first night he heard it. "What are you?" The breathing stopped. Then a voice answered, low and resonant, speaking in a language he had never heard yet somehow understood, as if the words bypassed his ears and etched themselves directly into his cortex. "We are the shadow that walked before the stars had names. We are the reason the universe learned to fear the dark." The shuttle's instruments went haywire. Navigation locked onto the coordinates the crystal had provided, and the ship dropped into a faster-than-light corridor that Tor had not programmed. The rift ahead was not empty. As the shuttle decelerated, he saw it. A vast, lightless construct hanging in the void, a sphere of absolute darkness that swallowed the light of distant galaxies. It was not a natural formation. It was a monument built on a scale that defied comprehension, and it was breathing. The same low, rhythmic pulse that had haunted him resonated from the structure, a heartbeat of an intelligence so ancient that it predated the formation of the Coalition's oldest member worlds. The voice spoke again, now calmer, almost curious. "You sought the truth. You will receive it. We are the original humans, not the species that evolved on the planet you call Earth. That was a seed, a recurrence. We are the template. Millions of your years ago, we spread across the galaxy. We hunted. We perfected the art of the silent kill, the patience of the stalk, the joy of the chase. We did not fear the dark because we were the dark made flesh. And we were not alone. We found other life, fledgling intelligences, crawling from their oceans and their burrows. We did not destroy them. That would have been wasteful. Instead, we did something far more elegant. We taught them to fear. Tor's mind reeled. The vanished species, the crystal records, the universal terror of darkness that every alien civilization shared. It was not natural selection. It was a genetic manipulation, a programmed instinct seeded into the DNA of every non-human sapient species that had ever evolved. The humans, the original humans, had visited each of their worlds in their earliest epochs, when they were still primitive and vulnerable. They came in the night, silent and unseen. They left no trace but one. A switch flipped in the amygdala, a permanent association between darkness and a nameless predator. A fear so profound it became hereditary, engraved in the very structure of their brains. Every alien in the galaxy that trembled at a shadow did so because their ancestors were hunted by things that looked like humans. And then the original humans vanished. They retreated into the dark rift, into their monument of shadow, entering a state of suspension. Why? The voice answered before he could ask. We had perfected the hunt. There were no more challenges, so we waited. We knew that the seed we planted would one day sprout again. We knew that a recurrence would appear, a species that rediscovered the ancient joy of the night. And when that happened, we would awaken. Your Earth humans are the recurrence. Their forgotten instinct is the key. And now the door is opening. Tor stared at the sphere, a horror so complete washing over him that he could not even scream. The breathing behind him was not a ghost. It was a scout, a fragment of the original consciousness that had been watching him since the moment he first read the research data. It had guided him, ensuring he would come here. And worse, far worse, the signal emanating from the sphere was already reaching the galaxy. It was slowly, inexorably, waking up the buried instincts in the Earth humans. Not all at once, but in waves. The first symptoms had already appeared. The strange calmness in the dark, the predatory gaze that unsettled aliens, the inexplicable sense of power that humans felt when the lights went out. And now, with the information leak and the alien panic, the Earth humans were becoming aware of their nature. Some were resisting, horrified. But others, a growing number, were beginning to understand. And in the dark of their own homes, they were smiling. Tor activated the shuttle's communication array. He had to warn the coalition, but the voice laughed, a soft, rumbling sound that vibrated through the hull. You cannot stop it. The recurrence is already here. The hunt will begin again, but this time we will not be satisfied with a single galaxy. The shuttle's systems shut down. Tor was left in complete darkness, the breathing now all around him, and a small, traitorous thought crept into his mind as he felt his own heartbeat match the rhythm of the sphere. A thought that was not entirely his own. The dark felt warm. The dark felt like home. On the other side of the galaxy, the Coalition Council convened in an emergency session, their chambers brighter than they had ever been. Delegate Smith, the human ambassador, stood before them, his expression a mixture of confusion and defiance. He had seen the leaked report. He had read the accusations. And in his hand, he held a data tablet with a message from Dr. Tor's shuttle, sent just before it went silent. The message contained a single chilling line: "They are waking up." The delegates, hundreds of them, stared at Smith with eyes wide with terror. And then the lights flickered. The darkness, for the first time in galactic history, seemed to have a presence, a weight. Smith looked at the ceiling, and for just a moment, a flicker of something ancient and hungry crossed his face before he suppressed it. He did not know what was happening. But somewhere deep in his ancestral memory, a voice whispered, and it told him not to be afraid. It told him this was his birthright. And in that moment, the aliens knew they were no longer the prey. They were the welcoming committee. The lights returned, but the silence did not lift. The entire chamber was holding its breath, hundreds of alien delegates paralyzed by the weight of what they had just witnessed. Smith stared at his own hands. He was still himself, still the retired soldier who had delivered a scripted presentation about human culture and art. But in that moment of darkness, something had whispered beneath his conscious mind, a voice as old as his species. It had not commanded him. It had not even frightened him. It had simply said, "This is where you belong." And the worst part, the part that would keep Smith awake for the rest of his life, was how good it had felt. The coalition scrambled to contain the crisis, but there was nothing to contain. No act of war had been committed. No human had lifted a hand in violence. The only thing that had changed was a perception, a revelation that spread like a virus through every alien psyche. Reports flooded in from a dozen star systems. A human crew on a mining station had noticed their alien colleagues avoiding them after night's cycle. A human diplomat had been asked politely to leave a restaurant because her presence was causing distress. A human child playing hide-and-seek in a darkened corridor had been discovered by a terrified maintenance worker who fled, claiming the child's eyes had reflected light the way a predator's do. The humans were bewildered, hurt, defensive. They had done nothing wrong, and that was precisely the horror of it. Dr. Tor's shuttle never returned, but one final transmission reached the Institute. It was not a message from Tor. It was a broadcast of pure neural data, decrypted by the Institute's systems as a single, continuous statement from the ancient intelligence in the rift. The statement was not a threat. It was a history, a confession, and a warning. It explained that the original humans had not seeded fear into the galaxy out of cruelty, but out of necessity. They had discovered something that pursued them, something older than the void itself, a predator so vast that even they had been prey. The fear they implanted in other species was a defense mechanism, a genetic alarm that would one day alert the galaxy to the return of that true enemy. The Earth humans were meant to be the guardians, the ones who would face it. Their predatory instincts were not a weapon against the coalition. They were a shield bred for a war that was only now approaching. The flickering lights, the awakening instincts, were a test, a calibration. The true horror was yet to come. The revelation did not calm the coalition. It shattered them. If humanity was the galaxy's last hope, what did that say about the nature of the universe? What kind of cosmos required a predator to protect it? The alien species that had prided themselves on peace, on intellect, on their transcendence of violence, now faced an impossible truth. Their safety was built on a lie. The dark was not empty. It was inhabited. And the only thing standing between them and annihilation was a species they had underestimated, a people they had called brutes and savages. The same species that now looked at them with hurt eyes, asking why they were being treated like monsters. Delegate Smith received a promotion. He was made the human ambassador to a newly formed emergency subcouncil, the one tasked with preparing for the inevitable conflict. He met daily with military strategists, xenobiologists, and weapons developers. They asked him time and again to explain human persistence hunting, to break down the psychology of a species that could track prey for days, that found joy in the chase. He explained as best he could the concept of a runner's high, the flow state that humans entered when they were focused, relentless, unbreakable. The aliens took notes with trembling hands. They asked if the Earth humans could train their young to resist the urge to hunt in the dark. Smith replied that they did not need to teach them to resist. They needed to teach them to channel it. The real challenge, he said with a grim smile, was that most humans still did not believe any of this. They thought it was science fiction. And the few who did believe had started to report strange dreams. Dreams of running through endless night, faster than light, with the scent of something ancient and familiar in the air. The final surprise came from the deepest layer of the decrypted transmission. The original humans had not vanished. They had scattered. They had encoded their consciousness into the dark matter between stars, into the fabric of spacetime itself. Every shadow was a fragment of a sleeping guardian, and the awakening was not an invasion. It was an inheritance. The Earth humans were not being replaced. They were being offered a choice, a birthright that had always been theirs, dormant in their genes. They could accept the full legacy of their species, learn the truths that lurked in the dark, and face the coming threat as the predators they were always meant to be. Or they could reject it, remain in the light, and hope that the old hunters would sleep forever. But the transmission made one thing chillingly clear. The true enemy did not care about their choice. It was coming anyway. And when it arrived, the dark would no longer be a metaphor. It would be a slaughterhouse, a feeding ground. And in that feeding ground, the only thing standing between survival and extinction would be a creature that had once learned to smile in the shadows. A creature that had never, in its entire evolutionary history, ever truly feared the night. The lights in every alien home remained on from that day forward, not because they were afraid of the humans, but because they were afraid of what would happen if the humans were not there. That fear, strange as it sounds, is perhaps the most profound compliment a species can receive. It means you are necessary. It means your presence is the difference between safety and annihilation. The irony, of course, is that humans themselves had no idea. They walked through life believing the dark was empty, that their comfort in shadows was just a quirk of evolution, never suspecting it was the echo of a cosmic purpose. For centuries, we told stories about monsters in the dark, never realizing the twist ending. The monster that survived, conquered every other predator, and smiled back at us from the shadows was us. The coalition's sealed report didn't end the truth. It only silenced the official narrative. What would you do if you learned that the shadow in the corner was not an enemy but an ally, a protector carved from your own ancestors? Perhaps a better question: what would you do if you learned that you were the monster and the universe needed you to be exactly that? Humanity's story is still being written, and the next chapter depends on whether we can accept the truth buried in our genes for millions of years. We were never the prey. We were the predator waiting for the right moment, and that moment is now. If stories like this resonate, if they make you wonder about the secrets hidden in the dark corners of existence, then you're in the right place. Subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss an episode. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being afraid of the dark might mean you're the one everyone else is depending on. And next time you turn off the lights, listen to your heartbeat. Notice how calm it is. Notice how the silence feels like home. Ask yourself, who else is listening? In a universe where every other species sleeps with the lights on, we are the ones who turn them off. Sweet dreams.